Hey, MegaJeff here again with a little fun. This one I will admit I borrowed, tweaked, twisted, and then people do these, but Thomas over at Merciful Metal did a album to turn 40. So we're talking, here we are in the new year, 2025. We're talking albums that were in 1985. Now, I said, I can do that because I'm a big 80s person. So I was alive back then. Thomas was not. I was buying albums back then. I was that old. And I started looking, and there were just so many great albums from 1985 that I'm like, I'm having a hard time. But then I started looking and noticing that there were quite a few that I was seeing that were the debut albums of bands. And so I thought, well, that'd be a different twist. So I looked at debut albums. It trimmed the list down to more reasonable so I can do this video. And this is not every band that had a debut album. This is all the ones I could quickly find out of my list that I have on vinyl. Some obscure, some mainstream, most of these have went on to do music up until fairly recently. We'll look at that too. So it's kind of like a where are they now? Chastain, Mystery of Illusion, hit us in 1985. Really, the first Chastain release, David Chastain, the guitar player, had done some stuff with the band Spike prior to this, but this was the first time we hear him really come out. And Chastain, the band, and then later David Chastain, the solo artist, instrumentalist, instrumental shredder type thing. Anyway, Chastain went on to do quite a few albums, a little bit of different singers over the years. They are still going strong as far as they are Leather's back, and they've been doing shows and stuff. I'm assuming they're still going with the shows, but anyway, their last album as the band Chastain was in 2017. So up until 2017 they were still putting out music. Here's one that everybody's going to be familiar with in the metal scene, and that's the first one from Exodus. Now, I bought this in 85 when not this album, not this version, but I bought the album when it came out. And I got to admit, I was not into the heavier stuff. I had dabbled with a little bit of Slayer, obviously had gotten into some of the other bands along the way, Metallica, Megadeth, things like that. This was, to me, a pretty harsh album. It was one of the more extreme, harsh vocal albums, but it didn't take very long before I fell in love with it. So, yeah, this is their first release, hit us in 1985, at least the majority of people, and their last release was just back in 2021, so they are still pumping it out. Here's one that's maybe a little more obscure, Hurricane. They, one of those 80s bands that came out, they were interesting because the guitar player was the brother of Rudy Sarzo, the bass player, and the bass player is the brother of Carlos Cavazos, the guitar player, who at the time were in Quiet Riot. So you got two brothers of two famous musicians getting together. Now, the band only did a couple albums. They did do an album. There was an album by Hurricane in 2023. Not sure. It was a CD only. I'm not sure of the full lineup, but I'm almost 100% sure it's a different singer because Kelly Hansen, the singer, has been in Foreigner for a couple decades now, at least a decade or more. So he's been doing that for a while. I'm not sure of the lineup of that new Hurricane album. I haven't looked at it closely. I have listened to it online, but I haven't got it or looked at it. But the band or somebody in the band has resurrected it years later and has done that. So, all right, King Kobra, Ready to Strike. King Kobra, Carmine Appice, and Friends released this album, and it's still one of my favorite albums. They went through some changes after this, but just some great stuff. One of the great albums of that year. Now, the band has, there was an album in 2023. Now, they did change singers, which I'll touch on in a minute, but they got Paul Shortino on vocals, and a couple of the guys are still in the band from the original lineup. So they are still putting out music. They put out a couple albums over the decades, and 2023 was the last one. So they are still pumping it. Megadeth, as mentioned, yes, I know this is not the first album. This is the remix version or reissued version. But first album, I bought it back when it came out. We used to listen to it all the time. And Megadeth got their start with their debut album in 1985. And, of course, we know they have continued to go on. And with albums as recent as 2022 was their last album, I believe. So, yes, still going strong, touring and everything. Rough Cut. the debut. This is where Paul Shortino came from, and after he's been in a lot of other projects, but now he is pretty much a full-time singer in King Cobra. And so, but Rough Cutt themselves have continued on. He did release a Rough Cutt album with some of the guys in 2021. So he's doing kind of both, and he does a lot of stuff. But Rough Cutt they did a couple pivotal albums in the 80s, and then have done some reissues and stuff like that over the years. And like I said, and then 2021 put out a new CD with 3 of the guys from the band doing their stuff. And this is a little bit more of an obscure band, but Tyrant, California, I believe California metal band, a little bit of a doom element, but not so much. Just great stuff. Tyrant put out a handful of, what, three or four albums in the 80s and stuff, early 90s, and, you know, I love their stuff. And then they came back, got back together, and put an album out in 2020. So they pulled back together some of the original guys, and 2020 hit us again. So there's a handful of releases by them, but they got their debut in 1985. Vicious Rumors, at the time, did not know that guitarist Vinnie Moore was going to go on to do great instrumental stuff, but the band has been pretty active over the decades. They put an album out in 2020 was their last album. I'm sure the lineups have changed and everything, but the band has put out quite a few releases in the past 40 years. Like I say, up to 2020. Great stuff there. Warrior, now, a little bit more obscure. Absolutely one of my highest ranking albums. I just love this album. They did an album after this. Love that album too. Would love to see that released on vinyl at some point. They had an album after that with Rob Rock singing on vocalist. They changed singers. Would love to see that on vinyl. They had an album after that with Mark Storace of Crocus on vocals. Would love to see that on vinyl. But the band pretty much has been dormant since 2003, even though there have been pieces of things online where you've seen where some of the guys have gotten together. They had Sean Peck on vocals doing some live shows not too long ago. I'd say in the past less than 10 years, 5-6 years or so. I remember seeing some stuff online, and then it seems like I saw recently that Sean was not doing it, but somebody else was singing with them of notoriety, but I can't recall. But the band hasn't recorded anything, but apparently some of the guys have been still stirring it up musically and live. But this album and the second album, great stuff. The singer from this album was this Perry, or anyway, I get his name wrong. The singer for this album did go on to work with Rough Cutt. They did some recordings that never got released. Kind of I don't know if they were like an audition tape, but there is a CD out there now of Rough Cutt, the band we already mentioned, with this vocalist on there. So that was kind of a cool crossover. Kind of just a reissue of stuff that came out back in the day, but kind of a connection there. All these bands doing that. And then we got White Lion. They hit us with 1985 and their debut album here. Now, White Lion had done a handful of albums. They've done some stuff that's been reissued over the years, but Mike Tramp has gone on to continue singing, releasing an album as recent as last year of White Lion songs. Him doing it with another band, kind of re-records with another band type thing. I have the first edition of that, and there's been a second edition of those songs that has been released up to recently. So Mike is still very active. He's done a lot of solo stuff and things under his own name and under band names. But this is where it all started for bringing them into the public eye. 1985 is White Lion. So there you go, just some cool stuff. Like I say, so many bands in 1985 that came out. Just great stuff. But these are some of the ones that I got off the top of my head that were debut albums that came out in 1985. Fun stuff. Hope you enjoyed that. I will see you later. Rock on and rock hard.